Hello, in this video, I'll be talking about impact calculus and ways that you can use impact calculus for a variety of arguments. For this video, it won't particularly be about a style of debate, whether that be critical or policy, but rather helpful tips to think about impact calculus as a whole and ways that you can employ impact calculus in different arguments to help judges better understand arguments and see them as more persuasive. So, what is impact calculus? Impact calculus is a way for us to think about how we decide between the severity of different impacts and ways that we value and devalue different impacts in comparison to each other. Impact calculus is incredibly important because it helps you decide what types of arguments are important and why they should come first or not come first. Impact calculus can be incredibly important in trying to settle debates or to help judges sort through debates that are really close because it can help you explain what the most relevant ideas for their decision making should be, which can frame a lot of the key questions that they end up making up in their ballot. And so impact calculus can kind of be defined by three different ways of doing impact calculus. The first is time frame, the second is magnitude, and the third is probability. All three of these are extremely important when considering impact calculus and are all important when thinking about what types of impacts we should prefer when deciding a debate. First is time frame. Time frame is about the impact that is most likely to happen the soonest, i.e., what is the soonest an impact can happen and how does that inflict the type of decision making that we make. If we know that climate change is something that's happening in front of us every day and is all around us and is something that is hurting the earth right now, then maybe that can make it more relevant than a war that isn't supposed to happen for another 10 to 20 years. Time frame is not the whole part of impact calculus, obviously, because we have two other portions to talk about. But it can be incredibly important in thinking about what is important in the here and the now for the primary decision makers that we make. And so when you want to think about what type of argument you would make with a time frame type of claim, you would want to make arguments about why the most relevant types of decisions that we can make are about the impacts that we see right in front of us and now the most relevant and coming now. Time frame arguments are incredibly important is because it allows you to make sequencing arguments about your impact versus the other team's impact, i.e., if your impact comes first, is it possible that the world even exists in the world of the other team if we don't consider your impact first because of how soon it comes? This could be an incredibly important argument to make sequencing arguments that allow you to get closer to things such as a permutation or reasons why the judge should prefer your impact turn. All of these are ways that you can deploy in time frame in a variety of ways that make your use of this particular prong of impact calculus particularly important. The second is magnitude. Magnitude is simply the severity of the conflict or the impact itself. So, does the impact just hurt people on a local level? Does it only happen in certain communities? Or is the magnitude that it hurts the entire globe, that the entire world is in trouble if we don't resolve a certain impact first, right? Magnitude arguments can be made in a variety of ways and have a lot to do with impact framing, which is something I'll go on a little bit at the end of this video. But in the context of magnitude, usually we like to think of magnitude as the bigger impact, the one with the more severity that could touch to more people, is the primary one that we should be considering first. And so magnitude can be very helpful in terms of thinking about it in comparison to a time frame, because if someone is able to say that their impact comes first, and so it should be considered first, if your impact is bigger, there might be reasons why the severity of your impact is more than just the time frame of it coming now, i.e., if we think climate change is something that, although it's hurting the earth now, there is time for us to resolve it. And so there's more time for us to delay the immediate consequences of that. And it's only affecting certain communities right now than the magnitude of a larger scale war that could happen more immediately or one that could happen shortly after the impacts that have been isolated by the other team could end up being more relevant. And so magnitude becomes a factor in this context that further complicates the decision making that you're making and could be a tool that you use against a team that has a different time frame argument than you do, or has a better time frame argument than you do. And so it ultimately becomes a question of how can you weigh the different types of impact calculus against each other to come out with persuasive arguments. The third thing that you may want to consider is probability. Probability can be extremely important, especially when thinking about the first two prongs of impact calculus, because probability tells you how likely it is an impact could happen. Even if an impact is situated that it would happen in about 5 to 10 years and the magnitude of it is huge, if the probability of the event itself is small, then maybe it isn't something that we should consider primary first. Or if the probability of yours is incredibly large and the time frame is soon, but the magnitude isn't as large, maybe there's still enough reason why your thinking through impact calculus could be incredibly useful for how the judges come into to their decision. Probability is incredibly important because when thinking about how likely something is to happen, it changes the value of how we think about the time frame and magnitude of those impacts. And therefore, that form of impact calc can be extremely important and kind of changing the other ways that the forms of impact calc are considered. And so all three of these problems of impact calc are heavily intertwined with each other and do a lot to play on the strengths and weaknesses of each other in order for you to make coherent arguments. You should think about impact calculus as a way for you to sequence the types of arguments that both you and your opponents are making. When you're thinking about what the most compelling argument to a judge should be, you should think about, are we winning magnitude, probability, and time frame? Are we only winning one of those things? Are we only winning two of them? Are we winning all three? Finding out and taking stock of the parts of impact calculus that you're winning or losing can be incredibly helpful for you to be able to make relevant arguments about why the judge should prefer the parts of impact calculus that you're winning in relation to the types of impact calc that the other team is winning. So where do you do all this impact calc? Is it somewhere that you do like randomly on the line by line? Is it somewhere that just happens sequentially, or is it something that happens all over the place? And the real answer is that it happens all over the place with all of your arguments. You should be doing impact calculus with any comparative argument that you're making with the other team. Anytime you want to compare the significance between your argument and the other team's argument, it will probably be beneficial for you in order to consider impact calculus as part of that argument, because in order for you to get the full weight of your impact, you want to win that the significant events of your impacts, the significant outcomes of the things that you're talking about, are more significant than the affirmative in every context, whether that be in the context of debating out the immediate impacts between war and nuclear war, or just betting out the impacts between like the app and like the link arguments that the neg is making, or the framework arguments that one team is making. All those things make impact framing a relevant, impact calculus a relevant part of debate as you move throughout the debate. The last thing I want to talk about is impact framing. How do you think about framing outside of the context of time frame, magnitude, and probability? Well, when you think about it, time frame, magnitude, and probability are ways of thinking about and being able to turn impacts into something that we can calculate and make a decision about. Impact framing is an additional step that frames how we value the ideas of time frame, magnitude, and probability. Impact framing arguments include arguments like utilitarianism, and includes arguments about ethics and the way that we should think about how particular violences affect different groups. When thinking about impact framing as an idea, you can use it as an additional tool that allows you to outframe other questions on impact calculus that's saying, regardless of the magnitude and probability of the event of what the other team is saying, the very idea that it is unethical that this violence exists in this smaller community in the first place is more important than the consideration of the larger health of the overall nation. And that is how you are able to bring in more theoretical standpoints and other critical perspectives that allow you to think about how you can change the judges' perspectives on what type of decisions they're making in terms of impact calculus. First, they have to come to an understanding of what types of impacts they should value first, and then they do the process of impact calculus. And so in order for you to win a judge's ballot, you should always be considering impact framing in addition to impact calculus in order for you to definitively win debates on the impact level. Hopefully this tutorial was really helpful for you in thinking about and considering some questions when you're thinking about impacts, and hopefully allowed you to better understand at least the 3 prongs of impact calculus and ways that you can employ them in your own arguments. Thank you.